Maximus!
Well, my fellow aviation travelers, you better buckle up because air travel is set to become a nightmare beginning this Friday, November 7th, unless Congress can somehow get the federal government reopened. And yeah, well, that's not going to happen. But on November 7th, flights to and from 40 major U.S. air markets are set to be slashed by as much as 10% in an attempt to relieve pressure on stretched air traffic control centers across America. As you may have heard, airlines have been ordered by the Department of Transportation to, quote, meaningfully reduce their schedules, which really means make seismic changes to their complicated flight schedules all across the United States. The drastic decision to slash tens of thousands of flights across the U.S. was announced by Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy on Wednesday, 5 November, who said his sole aim was to keep Americans safe. Duffy said at a press conference that our sole role is to make sure we keep this airspace as safe as possible. There's going to be a 10% reduction in capacity at 40 of our locations. This data is not based on which airline has more flights out of which location. He said this is about where the pressure is and how we relieve that pressure. The pressure is primarily coming from an understaffed and overworked air traffic control service, which is facing mounting staffing shortages as the record-breaking government shutdown continues without any sign of a resolution on the horizon. Controllers are being ordered to work unpaid for the foreseeable future, and that has resulted with hundreds of controller no-shows leaving towers across America staffed dangerously low. And many of those who have decided to stay on and work for free have been forced to rely on food handouts from airlines and airports, while others have taken on side hustles and some are just flat out broke. However, the problem is that it has become difficult to predict from day to day and from airport to airport which towers are going to face staffing shortages. For example, one day a major airport like Newark might have enough air traffic controllers on duty to handle a normal busy schedule, but then the next day too many controllers won't show up, leading to flight delays and cancellations. So the Federal Aviation Administration hopes that by reducing flights in and out of major U.S. airports, it will relieve pressure across the entire U.S. airspace system. However, while it may achieve its goal in the air, it's going to add to the nightmare on the ground. So that means that major airports with significant ATC staffing shortages will need to cut capacity by far more than the planned 10%, although it will be hard to predict when these cuts will have to be made until the controllers on any given shift fail to turn up for work. Then there's the sheer magnitude of the logistics involved and how most U.S. airlines plan to alter their flying schedules. Carriers like American Airlines or United can't just trim 10% of flights in and out of major hubs without a ripple effect across their entire schedule, with pilots, flight attendants, and airplanes out of position. Like I said, this is going to be a real potential nightmare. In a statement, United Airlines said it planned to make rolling updates to its schedule and hoped to give affected customers at least a few days' notice of flight delays or cancellations. However, American Airlines did say that it still anticipated that the vast majority of passengers would be able to travel as planned, adding that we continue to urge leaders in Washington to reach an immediate resolution to end the shutdown. Yeah, like I said, that's not going to happen. Although Duffy and the FAA were unable to provide a list of the 40 affected airports at their news conference on Wednesday, the list has now leaked online, and I'm going to show it to you and roll it on the screen while I continue to yammer on. I'll also roll the list again at the end of the video in case you miss it. So you may be wondering if your flight will be affected if you're not flying to one of the airports on the list. Well, it's too soon to say how widespread the disruption will be. There's no way to guarantee that just because your flight isn't between one of these 40 airports, it will go ahead as planned due to the disruption caused by the overall nationwide capacity reduction. Many U.S. airlines operate as network carriers, which means that their airplanes don't start and end in the same airport every day, of course. An airplane, along with its crew, will move from one city to the next as part of a complicated schedule that might not make any sense to the casual observer. So when there's a disruption in one part of the network, it can have a ripple effect across the entire network. Given that capacity cuts are being made at major hubs for all three big U.S. airlines, along with Southwest and Alaska, expect disruption to be widespread. That being said, the FAA plans to safeguard flights between major hubs, while regional flights, unfortunately, will be harder hit. So how will this situation affect international flights? Well, the capacity reductions are mainly aimed at relieving pressure on air traffic controllers dealing with domestic and regional, rather than long-haul international flights. At the moment, United says it plans to operate its long-haul international schedule as planned. But some estimates suggest that a 10% reduction in capacity could equate to between 4,000 and 5,000 flights per day across the United States that are being cut. Of course, that's without any additional cuts caused by local staffing shortages as well as downline cancellations. It's also been revealed that the 10% reduction won't be introduced right away. On Friday, October 7, the capacity reduction will start at 4% and then progressively work up to the 10% cut. So I hope some of you may have found this information helpful because, like I said, it's going to be a travel nightmare either way. However, regardless of your view of the shutdown, if the clowns in the Senate want to play Russian roulette with airline passengers' lives, at least this move by the FAA, while it may be chaos on the ground, at least it will be safer in the air. At least that's the hope. But what the hell do I know, right? That's why you're here. So let's take this down to the comment section and let me know what you think. Like I said, I'll roll that list of airports one more time, just in case you need a better look.